I worked as a custodian at a middle school for almost 5 years, usually the overnight shift. I'd clock in around 10 at night and stay until just before the buses started rolling in. At first I liked it, the quiet, the lack of interruptions, not dealing with kids or teachers. But over time the building at night felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it felt dead. The place creaked and groaned like a living thing, and when you're the only person in a giant empty school, every tiny noise makes your brain invent footsteps. The part one never got used to was the basement. The school was built in the 1950s and the basement ran beneath half the building. Concrete corridors, storage rooms, pipes and wires hanging overhead. It always smelled damp and musty, and the fluorescent lights buzzed and failed. One of the older custodians warned me to avoid it unless I absolutely had to. I laughed it off at first, but the unease was real. About 2 years into the job, I had to bring up a stack of folding chairs for an event. The only ones available were in the second storage room on the left down in the basement. I stood at the top of the stairwell longer than I wanted to and debated calling it in, but I didn't want to look lazy. I grabbed my flashlight and went down. Only a couple of the overhead lights came on, leaving most of the hall in shadow. The first storage room was packed with old desks. The second door squealed as I opened it. The room smelled of dust and old polish, and a stack of folding chairs leaned against the wall. I bent down and started pulling a load when I heard a soft dragging sound from somewhere down the hall, like a shoe scraping the floor. I froze, listening until it stopped. I told myself it was the pipes or a chair shifting. I carried the chairs out and, at the stairwell, felt an icy draft on my face, wrong for a windowless, stale basement. When I returned for more, the stack looked subtly different, as if it had shifted while I was gone. As I turned to leave again, I heard a thump and a scraping farther down the corridor. My flashlight wavered. About 20 feet away, a classroom door that should have been closed was cracked open. I knew I hadn't touched it. Every instinct told me to drop the chairs and run, but I walked closer, called out, and pushed the door open quickly. The room was empty, dusty science equipment, boxes, cobwebs. But then I heard the dragging shuffle again, this time behind me in the hallway. I spun, flashlight sweeping the concrete corridor, and felt that heavy, skin-prickling pressure of being watched. I snatched the chairs and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, not stopping until I was back in the main hallway upstairs, shaking and out of breath. I locked the stairwell door behind me, even though I wasn't supposed to, and refused to go back down that night. A week later, while mopping directly above the basement, I heard 3 loud, evenly spaced bangs like fists hitting the wall. The mop slipped from my hands. The basement door rattled as if something shoved against it from the other side. I stood gripping the mop until the noise stopped. After that, I refused to go down into the basement alone. If anything needed to come up, I waited for another custodian. I never told the others everything I heard because I expected either laughter or the usual, "that place is haunted," shrug. But I know what I felt. The slow dragging footsteps, that freezer-cold draft, and my stomach still turns when I think about it. At another school where I worked later, I was the newest guy and again stuck on overnight shifts. That building was huge, 4 floors and 2 gyms, and felt like a maze after dark. The rule was methodical, floor by floor, room by room, lights off, trash emptied, doors locked. One Friday I was alone because a coworker called out. At first it was normal. But around midnight on the 3rd floor, a part of the building that always felt too quiet, I noticed a classroom door about 20 feet away was open. I had already checked all the rooms earlier, and every door had been locked. My first instinct was to ignore it and keep mopping, but something made me walk over. Through the glass I saw the room looked empty, but a box near the back was tilted and had scuff marks on the floor like it had been dragged. I knew I hadn't moved it. I told myself it was fatigue. I shut the door and continued working, but when I passed the room again, the door stood wide open and that same box sat in the center of the floor. I called out, "Hello, who's in here?" My voice sounded small. There was no answer, only slow, deep breathing from the back of the room, deliberate and loud enough to hear. It wasn't pipes or wind, it was someone trying to be quiet but making sure I could hear them. I slammed the door and called my supervisor. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes, and those 20 minutes dragged like hours. When he arrived, we went back in together. He swept the room with a flashlight and we checked everywhere. The closets, under desks, nothing. He suggested I must be tired. I didn't argue, but I knew what I had heard. The rest of that night I kept my distance from that hallway, walking near the stairwell and keeping my flashlight aimed at the floor. Months later I avoided that third floor whenever I could. Some co-workers later told me a student had once snuck in to hide as a prank, but that didn't explain the breathing that night or the box moving on its own. Between the two schools, the memories stack up. The cold draft in the basement, the dragged box, the footsteps that came from nowhere, the doorknob rattling. I learned to be cautious, to travel with someone when possible, and to treat the basement and that quiet classroom like places you don't go alone. I still hear those sounds sometimes in my head, and they make my skin crawl.